Welcome back, all you speed freaks, to F1 Break Check. The long fall break is over, and the F1 circus returns in anger to the picturesque circuit of the Americas. On today's episode, we'll have all the news from Austin, a brief history of the US Grand Prix, and we'll talk about the latest technology kerfuffle in our tech corner. So pull on your boots, grab your Stetson, and buckle up. We are going full throttle into turn one on this week's episode of F1 Break Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Break Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, we're back with another episode of F1 Break Check. I am Scott Vick, one of your intrepid hosts. With me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. It's just one of those weeks yet again that is just busy. Just not a time to breathe. Almost. It's just one thing after another, and then 20 things are piled up, and it's one of those weeks, man. How about you?
Pretty much exactly right there with you, sir. It's one of those things where it just seems to be just nonstop. And just when you think that you're finally getting on top of things, something else will come along and throw you a curveball. So it's been a week. I'm ready for it to be over with already.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. It's crazy, man.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So let's jump into our history lesson for this week. On the afternoon of December 12th, 1958, the quiet surrounding Sebring International Raceway was shattered by the roar of F1 engines. The spirit of American motorsport collided with the elegance of European racing for the first time on the tarmac in Florida and saw Bruce McLaren claim victory, marking the dawn of what many hoped would be a permanent F1 legacy on American soil. The inaugural F1 US Grand Prix began a saga that has seen drama, intrigue, controversy, and tragedy. For decades, the US Grand Prix wandered through a patchwork of venues: Riverside, California; Watkins Glen in upstate New York; Long Beach, Detroit, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Dallas, and Indianapolis, each hosting races that flickered with promise, occasionally delivered great racing, or more often resulted in disappointment. It was a nomadic existence, and that mirrored America's struggle to fully embrace the international spectacle of F1. While other nations celebrated Formula One as a revered tradition, the U.S. grappled with its own motorsports giants, IndyCar and NASCAR, as well as other sports like baseball and football, leaving F1 to fight for attention in a very crowded field. Then came Circuit of the Americas. In 2012, a purpose-built track rose from the undulating Texas landscape known as the Hill Country, just outside of Austin. Its sweeping turns and dramatic elevation changes designed to test the mettle of the world's best drivers. Austin welcomed the Grand Prix in F1 with open arms, and the drivers and teams returned the embrace with open arms as well. Finally, it seemed the U.S. had found its permanent home on the F1 calendar. But the U.S. Grand Prix is not just a race. It's a battleground where titans clash and champions are made, much like the gun battles of the Old West. From the days of Senna and Prost to Hamilton and Verstappen, it has been the stage for unforgettable rivalries, drama, and the relentless pursuit of glory. America seems to have finally embraced F1, with the U.S. now hosting 3 races per season. But despite these newcomers, there can be only one U.S. Grand Prix and only one COTA. So, with that brief history lesson, because if you want a more in-depth history lesson, go back and listen to our podcast from last year where we did a very deep dive into all of the various ups and downs of the US Grand Prix, from Vegas to the blistering heat of Dallas that literally melted tires, etc. Go back and listen to that one, because that one was a pretty interesting listen. So, but anyway, Corey, your thoughts on the US Grand Prix and more specifically on COTA?
Oh yeah, we talked about it last week as well, but COTA is definitely one of my favorite tracks. I love the energy there. I love how technical it is. Just so many opportunities for passing and just really just great wheel-to-wheel racing. It's a phenomenal track. And more I learn about the history behind it, it makes me love the track even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like you. I love I love the track itself. I forgot who it was. I was reading somewhere that one of the drivers was talking about how he loves COTA and how it's more it. The designers took and did a phenomenal job with the track in making sure that it had more of like a quote unquote old world feel to it, as opposed to a lot of the newer tracks, which seem to be much more homogenized, if you will, and somewhat, a little too clinical. COTA is one of those tracks where it's very much like Spa, or Suzuka, with the elevation, with massive elevation changes and things like that. And it's really just one of those great tracks. And I'm like you that for the most part, I like the atmosphere. My only complaint is that because of its proximity to Austin, they do way too many tie-ins with the University of Texas, which I hate. Burnt orange makes me puke. And I just those parts I could take and do without, but otherwise the rest of it is just amazing. Whether it be the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders flanking the drivers as they're walking out to the grid, or just the amazing atmosphere in the paddock and everything is just. Like I said last week on the run up to the race, this is like, probably my second or third favorite track on the calendar.
Yeah,
it's right there neck and neck with Silverstone. Spa being, the granddaddy of them all, but this one holds a very special near and dear place in my heart.
What race is your favorite at COTA?
My favorite race at COTA? Oh, that's hard to pick. I think I've got to go with, I forget which year it was. I think it was either 13 or 14 where and Sebastian Vettel won the race. It was one of his last races with Red Bull, and it was just a fantastic battle all day back and forth, and with Vettel coming out on top. And it was also early on in COTA's life, if you will, back when it was still kind of building up to where it's at now. But it was one of those just absolutely fantastic races. And so I'd have to say that's probably right up there as one of my favorites.
Awesome, man. Nice.
How about you?
Man, I was thinking about the 2021 race, but man, this last race was really, really solid. There's so many different battles that I really enjoyed this last race. So it's a toss up for me.
Fantastic. Yeah. This one was definitely up there as one of the better races. It was it was a blast to watch. It really was.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So let's jump into our tech corner. So this week we got kind of a kerfuffle about the FIA was apparently investigating, and at first it was a unnamed team. They were investigating them for a possible infraction in being able to break park for May rules. We got a little more information as the weekend went along that first and foremost with the aforementioned unnamed team ended up being Red Bull. They ended up raising their own hand and saying, hey, it's us that they're investigating. And the entire investigation circulated around the bib or what's sometimes referred to as the T tray on the car.
Can you describe for us, the audience as well, what exactly is the bib when you're talking about that? What does that look like? What is its function?
Sure. Okay. So the bib, or like I said, sometimes it's referred to as the T tray, is a aerodynamic element that is on the underside of the car, and it starts right in front of where the under tray for the car starts. So the leading edge of the tray. So to give you a little bit more perspective of how it's designed and everything. So imagine an F1 driver sitting in the cockpit. they are leaned way back and their feet are actually up very, very high. Most of the time, the driver's feet would be, when they're sitting leaning back in the car, their feet are actually almost at the same level as their chest. So their feet are way up. So what this does is this leaves a curved open area underneath the car between the front wing through the front axle back to the cockpit itself. So in that area underneath, right before the floor of the car, which, before the ground effects era started in 2022, before then, all of the cars had a flat bottoms, meaning that they were not allowed to create any kind of aerodynamics that could be generated by the underside of the car. And the only thing that was on the underside of the cars, they would have the plank, which we talked about at great length after the US Grand Prix last year, which, because Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc's plank got worn down too much, they were disqualified from the race. So that would literally, you would have a flat bottom with the plank attached to it. Well, with the aerodynamics generated by ground effects now, the undersides of the car have what's called a Venturi tunnel, which is basically, it's a space where the air is able to flow underneath the car and accelerate, which then takes and creates downforce. Well, the bib sits right in front of those tunnels, and it's used as a splitter. So what that does is it takes the air that's coming through the front wings and takes and splits it so that it's able to direct it into the underside and into those tunnels underneath the car, so that it's able to the air is cleaner going into the tunnels so that there's less turbulence and it creates more downforce. So that bib, though, the teams have the ability to take and adjust how high or how low that bib sits to the ground in relationship to the ground. Now, so of course, with the lower you can get it to the ground, the more downforce it's going to take and generate. But at the same time, if it's hitting, because it's also the mounting point for the plank underneath the car, it could take, if you set it too low, it would rub on the front edge of the plank and could potentially rub too much off of the plank. So the teams have to make a compromise between where they set it at for qualifying. Under Parc Fermé rules, what this means is that when the car takes and leaves the pit for its first qualifying lap, at that point, the cars are quote unquote frozen, meaning that the teams are not allowed to make changes to the car as far as the setup goes, as far as, things like camber on the tires or shock absorbers, anything like that. Nothing like that can be changed under Parc Fermé rules. So the teams have to, like I said, make a compromise of it, because when the cars go out for qualifying, they have very, very small fuel loads. So just enough to basically do 3 or 4 laps and before they come back into the pits. Whereas if they set the bib too low to the ground, when they fill the car up for the race on Sunday, the weight of the additional fuel would cause the bib to actually come lower to the ground and actually touch. So they have to kind of make that compromise for qualifying, because that's where the bib has to stay for the remainder of the weekend, through the rest of qualifying and through the race itself on Sunday.
So how was Red Bull taking advantage of this? I mean, I'm guessing that they did something illegal or something that the FIA thinks is illegal. What happened there?
Well, actually, it was one of the teams, not, as everybody knows, I'm a huge McLaren fan, but McLaren, and specifically Zach, made a complaint about how they had possibly put in a system that would allow them to adjust the bib under Parc Fermé rules without the FIA being aware of it, so that they could set it lower during qualifying and then be able to set it to a higher point for the race, but being able to do it without the FIA being aware of it while it was in Parc Fermé. So, but the thing was, though, is that in the end, it turns out that it was a much ado about nothing, because Red Bull came out and said, when they admitted that, yes, they were the ones that being investigated, they came out and said, okay, but the only thing is, yes, we have this system, and every single team has the ability to be able to adjust the
Mm-hmm.
height of the bib. But the system that Red Bull was using, the other teams thought that maybe they had some way of doing it. But the thing was, though, is that Red Bull came out and said, hey, when the car is assembled and ready to be run, the bib cannot, our adjustment method doesn't can't be used. And it turns out that, yes, that is indeed the case. And they even showed it to the inspectors of the FIA, because it turns out that the way that their bib adjustment is done is it's done by a set screw that is in the footwell of the car underneath the pedals. So the only way that they could actually adjust the bib was they had to actually remove the nose cone, remove the pedal box, and then they even have a special tool that they have to use in order to be able to reach in and get to that set screw in order to be able to adjust the bib. So the whole thing was is that somebody had thought that they had some way of being able to adjust it, through a button or a switch or something, or a lever or something inside of the car. But the drivers also admitted that no, there was no way to do this without, some kind of, having to disassemble parts of the car in order to be able to get to it. So it ended up being nothing. But like I said, the Red Bull had to demonstrate to the FIA that no, this can't be adjusted under Parc Fermé rules. So there's nothing bad going on. So, so that's what it all ended up being, much ado about nothing. But Red Bull did have to submit to the FIA. They had to leave it open so that the FIA could attach one of their seals to the screw, or what. I don't know if they attached it to the screw or if they attached it to the pedal box or something along those lines. But they put in some kind of seal in there to say that, okay, once this seal's been put in place, there was no way that they could tamper with the bib adjustment without removing that seal. So it's basically Red Bull just said, okay, hey, we're under investigation. We've demonstrated to the FIA that we're not, breaking any rules or anything, and all is right with the world. So,
okay. So looking at the bib, I mean, it sounds like to me there's a huge amount of performance or lack of performance, just really depending on how that bib is constructed or how it's configured. Can you talk a little bit more about how big of a difference does a bib actually make?
Well, like I was saying before, is that because of the way that it takes and splits the air coming from the front wings before it is channeled underneath the floor, depending upon the ride height, it can take and make a huge amount of difference. So even, as small as a, 5 or 10 millimeter difference can make a huge difference in the amount of downforce that is generated by the tunnels underneath the floor and the ground effects. So, it does make a very, very large difference. And then also, like I said, because it is also the mounting point, the front mounting point for the plank, for the ride height. Like I said, if it's set too low, it will cause unnecessary wear on the plank, which could end up causing the car to be disqualified. So the bib really does make a huge amount of difference. And then, like I said, but because of the Parc Fermé rules, the teams have to take and use a compromise for qualifying that says, okay, we got to set it a little bit higher, because with the lower fuel loads, it's going to sit higher up off the ground. So they have to find that kind of that happy medium of how low can we get it to generate the maximum amount of downforce during qualifying, but will still provide, enough room between the bottom of the bib and the ground, during under the heavier fuel loads of the race.
So you've gone over a little bit of the rules for Parc Fermé, but would you talk a little bit more about what exactly is and is not allowed?
Okay. So under Parc Fermé rules, like I said, you're not allowed once the car leaves the garage and the pit and goes out for its first qualifying lap. At that point, it is under Parc Fermé. And under Parc Fermé, you're not allowed to make any, like I said before, you're not allowed to make any changes to the car with a few exceptions. So things like camber, bumps, torsion bar rigidity, gears in the gearbox, anything like that. All of that is not allowed once the car is in Parc Fermé. Now under Parc Fermé, they are allowed to do a few things. So one thing that they're allowed to do is they're allowed to replenish or replace any what they refer to as consumables. So anything that's consumed by the car, so things like water, oil, fuel, grease, anything like that, they're allowed to, replenish or completely, replace. So like if they need to, they can flush all the brake fluid out, because that's considered a consumable. So they're allowed to do that. They're also allowed to change what they refer to as the brake lining. So, i.e., basically the brake pads. They're allowed to change out the brake pads under Parc Fermé. Now, and then the final thing is they're allowed to change the front wing settings, so long as they do not change the front wing to under a different specification. Now, what that means, and actually, let me drop that last line. And so they're also allowed to make changes to the front wing as far as the angle of attack for the planes, but they're not allowed to change the wing itself, with an exception. Now, the one other exception under Parc Fermé is the teams are allowed to replace parts that have been damaged during qualifying, so long as they replace it with a part of the same specification. Now, what that means is that, for example, say McLaren has a brand new rear wing for the car, but they only have one of it. They've only been able to make one for that particular race. If they damage that rear wing during qualifying, if they replace it with a rear wing of the same specification, then that's allowed. But now if they replace it with a rear wing of a different specification, then that incurs a penalty. And like I was just saying, is if you have because all of the teams, when they bring a new part that's considered a new specification, i.e. an upgrade, they have to submit that in writing to the FIA, so the FIA knows about it. The FIA attaches their seal to it, so that with the serial number, so that they know that particular part is of specification whatever. So if you have an A spec rear wing and a B spec rear wing, and you damage the A spec rear wing during qualifying, but you don't have another A spec, and you have to replace it with the B spec wing, then that's when you take and incur a penalty. Same way if the car is damaged very heavily. So like say a driver had, like what George Russell had, a huge shunt, during the sprint qualifying. So at that point, because they had to replace several of the parts that were damaged in the accident with parts of a different specification, that's when the grid penalties start coming into place, and ended up, relegating George to the back of the field during the sprint. So that's what it means by under, the Parc Fermé specifications, things that they're allowed to change, things like that. So
cool. All right, you ready to go on to the recap?
Yes, let's jump into the recap for the weekend. This was another sprint weekend, one of many that we're going to have over the next couple of weeks as the season winds down. So Max won the sprint after a pretty spirited drive. It wasn't just walk away drive for Max. Sainz comes in second, showing the strength of Ferrari this weekend, and Lando, who went from fourth to second in the first corner and drove drove pretty well, had one tiny mistake, locks it up on the last lap where he got overhauled by Sainz,
Yeah.
and wound up finishing third on the day. But still some much needed points, but he lost a little bit of ground to Max because of that. So your thoughts?
I thought it was a great sprint. It was great to see Max up in front. And like you said, it was not he's up by 30 seconds. It was a fight the entire way, but
yeah,
you can see that those upgrades definitely did help throughout that sprint. Because before
yes,
he wasn't
absolutely
able to go over fifth place, and now he's up there again. So those whatever Red Bull did as far as the upgrades goes really has been helping out, and it's always great to see Sainz up there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ferrari did a very good points haul, and then we'll talk about this more in the race, but when we talk about, do we have it on there? Well, when we talk about Perez.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was definitely, just a very, very strong showing for both for, like you said, both for Max and for Ferrari this weekend. The Red Bull, at least was under the Red Bull under Max, looked much, much stronger. Sergio, didn't look quite as strong, but it's definitely a better showing than what we saw earlier in the year from Perez. So all in all, not a bad, not a bad weekend, for
Sprint was
Red Bull.
good for him. Yeah.
Yeah, the sprint was very good for him. He did qualify 11th, and only made it into, did make it out of Q2 during the sprint qualifying. So he actually qualified 11th and finished in 9th. So not a bad sprint for Perez either. But the real surprise was who you during our run up preview part of last week's episode, you said Haas was going to have a really good weekend, and you weren't kidding. Both Haas drivers managed to take and score points in the sprint. Kevin Magnussen qualified very, very well, or actually both Nico and K-Mag managed to qualify in Q3 for the sprint. They came home in 7th and 8th, so 3 points there for them. So they had they were really quite the surprise this weekend, especially during the sprint.
Oh, no doubt about it. They looked really, really good, very solid on that sprint.
Yes, absolutely. And then also the other surprise though too was Colapinto continues to impress quite mightily in the fact that he made it in, picked up the last spot in Q3, qualifies 10th. And although he had he had a couple battles, but he dropped back a little bit, ended up coming coming home in 12th, and outside of the points. But he still he continues to impress quite mightily. Even for at least for the sprint, ends up out qualifying his much more highly touted teammate again. So it was a very impressive performance from Colapinto.
Yeah, it's surprising how good he's actually doing, and it's going to be funny to see what happens next year, because this is a temporary assignment for him. As we all know, he's being replaced by Sainz first of next year. So this is basically an audition for him. And oh my gosh, he is doing phenomenal in this last few races that we have of this year.
Yes, he has. He has done just a absolutely tremendous job, which, it tells me, the one thing that we kind of, we theorized on, but it's definitely shown that it was not the car, it was Sargent just never seemed to really settle in to the higher speeds and the requirements of F1, which is sad because I like Sargent, I really wanted him to do well, but it just goes to show that he just wasn't suited for Formula One, and Calapinto has been just a absolute revelation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. It's funny when you compare him with Sargent, because Sargent wasn't able to do anything at all, and now we have somebody that's, you know, a few races in and he's already scoring points and looking really good. Even in a race, he's racing against Alonso. It's just such
Yes.
a difference in driver ability.
Oh yeah,
Driver ability.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, it's been just nothing short. He has been just nothing short of a revelation. And like you said, it's basically his time at Williams is more or less a uh an audition, and it is definitely made, because there's only the one seat left on the grid right now, and that's at Audi for next year. But he is definitely giving them something to really look at, that he would be an absolutely fantastic teammate to Hulkenberg next year over at Audi.
Yeah. Right. I keep holding out hope for old Botas.
Yeah, I do too, but so I don't know. It's definitely going to make it much harder. It's definitely Calapinto has definitely made it a much more difficult path for
Yeah.
Botas, unfortunately.
Yep. 100%.
I'm going to rail real quick on. I am, despite the excitement of the sprint, in the overall scheme of things, I am becoming more like Max in the fact that I am starting to think that maybe the sprint was a fun experiment. It was a nice idea, but I really don't think that it belongs in Formula One. I
Yeah.
think that as we've discussed before, the part of the reasons why I didn't like it was because I thought that it took away too much, time, of the free practice time,
That's true.
that,
It does.
at
Yeah.
least was under its current iteration. I would much rather see it go back to because I understand the need for the sprint. I understand that, it's to, help with, it's for the fans. It's something to take and get the fans to come to the racetrack on Saturday for. But my whole problem with the sprint in its current iteration is as I don't like having two totally separate qualifyings. I think that the first year that we had the sprint where your finishing position on Saturday in the sprint dictated your starting position for the race on Sunday. So I really think that it needs to go back to a free practice on Friday, qualifying on Friday afternoon, another free practice on Saturday, sprint Saturday afternoon, and then the sprint takes and dictates your position. Because I think that we would also see the drivers fighting even harder during the sprint if they knew that, hey, if I can gain, we may not be very good in qualifying trim, but our race trim is much better. That if I can qualify, in one place, but if I can make up in race trim, I can make up 4 or 5 places during the race, during the sprint race. That would give me that much better of a chance on, bring me up that much higher on the grid for Sunday, which would then give me an even better chance in race trim of being able to make up even a couple more places and maybe, improve, the points position that the team is able to, grab, from the race. But
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents. Your thoughts on the sprint in general, or anything else?
Yeah, I understand your perspective on the sprint and needing more practices, but I don't know, man. There's something about the sprint I just enjoy. It's like having two races in a weekend. I don't know. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely, like I said, I can definitely see the, from a fan service perspective. Like I said, I just don't like the whole idea of two separate qualifyings, because like what we saw at China this year, where Lewis Hamilton qualified very well for the sprint, raced very well during the sprint, but then they made a change to the car during race qualifying that saw him get dropped, to the back of the grid and ends up, not making it out of Q1, which I think is just, I don't know. I think the whole pressure of that it puts upon the mechanics and the rest of the team to take and have two different qualifyings in a race weekend, I think it just puts too much pressure on them to take and try to maximize every aspect of the car for all intents and purposes twice in a 24-hour period. That's where I have a real problem with it. Like I said, I love the sprint, I love the concept of it, but I just think that having two qualifying sessions is where it lets the fans and maybe the teams down. But then again, I'm sure that there's people that would argue, well, no, having two different qualifyings adds more drama to it. So, because it does put the pressure on the teams.
Yeah, I mean it's really one or the other, right? Either really good for the fans and not so good for the teams, especially when they need that type of data, or you make it more for the teams and less for the fans, for the most part. You know what I mean? Because the free practices is it's great to watch and everything like that as a fan, but it's not near the excitement of a sprint. So yeah, it's funny because you have that dichotomy. It's hard to say which one you like the best.
Yeah, so let's jump into the race. So first of all, Sainz, excellent second place, was just a harbinger of what was to come, in the fact that Ferrari took and had a very strong, and amazing 1-2 finish on the weekend. So it was definitely a very, very good weekend for Ferrari. Charles Leclerc starts in fourth place. And with the battle between Max and Lando, who occupied the front row, he was able to sweep past both of them into the lead. Your thoughts on Ferrari's triumph this weekend with both Charles and Carlos's brilliant drives this weekend?
Oh, I absolutely love it. I think it's a fantastic time for them. Yeah, I'm a big fan of both of theirs. Plus, Fred Vasseur, I think, is just phenomenal. So I like to see that they're out there, they're maximizing points, and really now they are truly in contention for that constructors championship now. Whereas before they really
absolutely.
But now there's no joke about it. Not very many races left.
None whatsoever.
They seriously could be the winners here. What an upset.
55 points.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It was a 55-point weekend for Ferrari between the 1-2 on Sunday, plus Sainz's, brilliant drive during the sprint, and Leclerc actually also had a very good race on Saturday as well. He comes home fourth. So, they absolutely, with what was on offer for the weekend, they virtually, took almost max points this weekend. They came dangerously close. And this puts them only 8 points behind Red Bull right now. So they have a very, very good opportunity that, depending, what Checo and Max do this weekend in Mexico, they have a very, very good chance of overhauling Red Bull and pulling into second place this weekend at Mexico. So it's just, we've got a full-on knockdown, drag-out fight for the Constructors' Championship brewing.
Yeah.
That I think is going to come down to the last race of the season.
Definitely. Then on to
all right,
Max and Lando.
Yeah. So bringing up the fight for the last step on the podium, we had Max actually end up being awarded third place for the weekend after a very, very spirited fight between he and Lando. These guys were battling all race long. And at one point, though, Max and Lando made a pass attempt on the outside around Max. Now, by rule, because Max already had the apex, he was considered to have the corner. But then he takes and pushes Lando very wide and ends up causing Lando to exceed track limits. So the FIA, in their infinite stupidity, takes and gives Lando a 5-second grid penalty. And because he wasn't able to open up a big enough gap over Max at the end, Max, by virtue of the 5-second penalty, was actually able to claim the third step on the podium. I know that's a lot to unpack. So let's start with, first of all, the penalty. Your thoughts on the penalty, and then I'll chime in.
Okay. You and I may disagree on this one, but I think the penalty was actually well deserved. Lando he had the black and whites. They were black and white flag. For those that don't know, that's when you violate the track limits, which Lando had done many times before that. And that was yet another time that Lando went over the track limit. So, that was coming one way or another. Lando was just out there he wanted that third spot no matter what. He had to, in his mind, I'm sure he had to get in front of Max because he already lost a point to Max in a sprint. And now this is another couple points that he lost. So now that championship, the drivers' championship, now is a little bit further out of reach. Every point at this, especially as late as we are, every point counts. And 3 points may not sound like a whole lot, but it's a chasm worth of points, because especially if you don't see Max have any DNFs or doesn't finish a race, he has something wrong with the car, doesn't get any points. Failing that, it's going to be really hard for Lando to get past him. But as far as the ruling goes, I kind of agree with it.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you in this particular case, because you're right. Lando had already been, warned because for exceeding track limits. But in this particular case, I disagree, because the fact that he was forced off, that if he had not been forced off by Max, because he obviously was carrying more speed into the corner, and just because Max had the apex of the corner, Lando already pretty much had the overtake done. But by virtue of Max forcing him out wide, that it was he either goes wide and exceeds track limits, or they have an accident. And the fact that Lando,
back.
There's sorry,
a third option. He could have pulled back and slowed down and avoided it.
Well, after having watched it a couple times, I don't know that even if he had backed off because of where they were positioned on the track, that even if he had backed out, I still don't think he would have been able to completely avoid exceeding track limits. So, and the other thing too, though, is that I saw something, and I don't remember this from happening during the sprint, but I saw a interview with Piastri, Lando's teammate, after the race, that it was the opposite during the sprint on Saturday, that Oscar was battling and forced, and I forget who it was off the top of my head, forced another driver wide, but Piastri was given the penalty. So I don't know. I think that it's one of those things that I don't know. I don't know. I'm of the opinion that I think that in some of these cases, the FIA is too quick to take and jump in, that I think it should have been one of those things where it's just, let them figure it out on track, just like they would NASCAR or IndyCar. Let them figure it out on track themselves, as long as it's not, super blatant where, the drivers, intentionally driving off, the track in order to gain an advantage or anything like that. I don't know. I'm kind of talking in circles right now, because now all of a sudden it's like, the more I think about it, the more convoluted my thought process becomes, that I don't think I'm at this point, I'm not even sure what the hell I think anymore. So
That's
let's
funny.
take and move on. So Oscar Piastri, talking about Lando's teammate. Now he, on the other hand, had a really good he had a really good weekend. So for the sprint, he didn't have the greatest of qualifying. In fact, he didn't even he ends up qualifying 16th on the grid. He actually finished. Let's see, yeah. So he didn't even make it out of Q1. So he didn't have a real good qualifying for the sprint, but then he takes and he battles and works his tail off and works his way all the way up to 10th place. Still didn't make garner any points for the sprint, but he used that momentum to take and do an absolutely excellent job of qualifying. Got him qualified 5th for the race on Sunday, and he battle hard all weekend long, and ends up coming in just right behind his teammate. So it take and helped tremendously with the point haul for the constructors championship. And more importantly, kept Perez further down. So it minimized Red Bull's points for the weekend. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had his challenges, but on race day, he was able to come back pretty well. He
Mm-hmm.
got he was he was much more helpful than say Checo was for
Yeah.
for Max. But yeah, I mean, he again, this is his second year and he's driving better than so many veterans that are on the grid right
Oh
now.
yeah.
It's amazing to me how poised and how great of a driver in his second year, not even a full 2 years yet, all completed.
Yes.
So
2 words: championship caliber.
yeah, there you go. That's it.
Yeah. This. I mean, like I said, at the beginning of last year, when the McLaren was so dreadful, and Oscar was not doing well at all, we put a lot of we kind of piled up on him, but since the Dutch Grand Prix last year going forward, he has been just absolutely phenomenal. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, again, I brought this up a number of times already, but his record that for the season still holds in the fact that he has completed every
Wow.
single lap this year, sprint and race, and the fact that he's the only driver on the grid who can make that claim. Starting from where he did for the sprint, it showed just the grit and determination that this kid has to go along with his natural ability.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, he was just nothing less than inspired this weekend,
Yep.
and I think that is just a phenomenal weekend for him all
Yeah.
around. So
Love to see it.
good for Oscar. And on the flip side, we kind of alluded to it just a little bit ago, but we got to talk about Checo being on the flip side of in relationship to his teammate, in the fact that he didn't have a great qualifying for the sprint, didn't have a great qualifying for the race, and he just really was never in a position to really help Max or to help Red Bull in its quest for the constructors championship.
Yeah, looking at his placement, he got seventh place in the race. But and technically, however you want to look at it, Max really got fourth, but he's promoted to third, which really doesn't sound like that big of a variance. But if you look at the timings, he was so far off Max's pace. It's like he is alone driving out there. He doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
a number two. He doesn't have a second car. And for the most part, Red Bull doesn't have a second driver. So
Yeah.
I know that Red Bull gets quite a bit of money from Checo for his seat. So, is it enough to compensate them for not getting the constructors? Because that's what we're facing right now. Red Bull is not going to get the constructors, and it's solely because Checo is not performing. He's underperforming greatly.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts around that?
No, I totally agree with you right there. Is that I think it just boils down to that is the fact that right now Lando is in the thick of the fight, and Oscar is right there to help him out as much as possible. And at the same time, when Lando does falter, Oscar is there to pounce and take maximum advantage for himself in the event that Lando isn't there. Whereas like you said, Checo is not now. Admittedly, this weekend he looked much better than he had the previous few weekends, but before the fall break. But at the same time, he's still not there, in a position to help Max and to help garner maximum points for Red Bull, everything.
Forget Max for a moment. He's not able to help Red Bull at all.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Very, very
that's exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it. And you're right that he does bring in some sponsorship money to Red Bull, but but you're right. The money lost by not winning the constructors, you got to kind of wonder, does it make up that difference? And which I highly doubt that it does. And you have to kind of wonder, even though, earlier this season, Red Bull gave Checo the 2-year extension, makes you kind of wonder where in the performance clauses or what have you, does Red Bull have? Is Checo, even going to be in that seat come next year?
Yeah. I mean, if I were Christian Horner, I would have serious doubts. And again, unless that sponsorship money outweighs what they will win in the constructors, because you can guarantee that more than likely Ferrari is going to overtake them being Red Bull. So then that puts them down to third place, right? So, and that's because Red Bull had such a blister of a season in the very beginning. Let's fast forward to next year. Their car woes will still probably be there, especially with Adrian Newey not being there. So we're looking at them not having that great of a first season. So, it's likely they're not going to get third place next year as in constructors. So again, are you going to start looking at how much money versus you could be getting in constructors championships versus how much money Checo is bringing in? It'll be interesting. I'm sure that's what they're weighing against, right? Because it's not his driving ability at this point.
Well, I mean, yes, I think that it's a combination of things. I think that, yes, there's the financial part of it, but yes, there's also the, performance standpoint in the fact that, okay, the car is still very much built around Verstappen. And yes, they admit that, early, they were able to come out of the gate really strong at the beginning of the year, but the woes with the car started to escalate or, not escalate. That's not the word I'm looking for here, but, the performance hits of the car started to take their toll on Verstappen as well as Checo. That I think that one of the things they have to look at is okay, do we think that going into next year with the way the car is now, with where we think the car is going, will he have that, will he be able to start stepping up his game? Because we already saw it this weekend that he did look much better than, like I said, than what he did before the winter break. And the upgrades seem to help him out as well, but he's still not quite on top of the upgrades as much as Max is. So I think there's a number of things that they're going to have to take away over the course of the year. But I saw something. I didn't get a chance to read the whole news blurb, but there was something about how, Helmut Marko, the leader at Red Bull, made some comments about how they're going to make another evaluation on Checo, much like they did before this, during the summer break. They're going to make another evaluation on him at the end of the season. So we're going to see if, whether he's, demoted to, and they promote Lawson or Yuki or some other driver up to that second Red Bull seat next year. So
Yeah.
it's more to come.
Yeah. Yeah. As we
All right.
discussed, I really think them not taking a look um, at Yuki would be it would not be the right thing to do. He's
Yeah.
done such a fantastic job, uh, especially this year and even last year, that I
Mm-hmm.
really hope they take a serious look at Yuki. Like 2032.
As do I. So with that being said, let's take and switch up the next two items. We'll go ahead and let's talk about Racing Bulls now. Then,
yeah,
in the fact that Lawson in his first race, weekend, replacing the super popular Daniel Ricciardo. This weekend, he impressed mightily in the fact that he didn't have a great sprint, qualifying or finish, but I think we can partially chalk that up to just the fact that again, it was his first race. I mean, he did manage to get out of Q1 for the sprint. He ends up finishing 16th, so not a great sprint. But then come qualifying for the race, he took and had a much better qualifying. Actually, no, I take that back. So he did not. So he made it out of Q1 into Q2, but then wasn't able to continue because of a problem with the car.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, he ends up finishing though ninth, and in his first full race weekend, he ends up scoring points in the race. So I mean, I think that as much as you and I both love Danny Rick, I think that moving away from Danny Rick and going to Lawson is definitely the right move, by the fact that Lawson takes and scores points in his first full Grand Prix, at for this season. So your thoughts on Liam first, and then we'll talk about Yuki.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree about Liam. I mean, he's been needing to be in that seat for a while now. You and I have talked about that. Danny Rick is a great personality, but his driving ability has really severely declined ever since he left Red Bull, several years ago now. So the time really should have been a few races ago. That way they could have maximized points for Racing Bulls. But he's in the seat now, seeing what he can do. Getting the seat, probably he'll be guaranteed a seat at least at Racing Bulls, maybe even being promoted up to the senior team at Red Bull.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that Yuki is definitely going to have his work cut out for him now, because with this being the first full Grand Prix weekend, not his first full Grand Prix weekend ever for Liam Lawson, but his first one for this year after having been sitting on the sidelines since Ricardo's return last season. But Yuki's definitely going to have his work cut out for him, and this weekend was not great for him. I mean, now he did qualify well for the sprint. He ends up qualifying ninth, but he ends up losing out a couple places and finishes it in 11th on the sprint. And then he only qualifies 11th for the race itself. So he doesn't make it out of Q2. Now, admittedly, and then he ends up losing a couple places and ends up, through various factors, ends up finishing 14th on the weekend and a lap down. So with that in mind, you got to think that Yuki, if he wants to be considered for that second seat at Red Bull next year, he is definitely going to have to, he's stepped up his game, like you said, towards the end of last season and into this season. But now with a much more hungry and talented teammate, he's going to have to step up his game even more. Oh, yeah. And I'm hoping that we'll see that. But your thoughts on whether, he'll be able to accomplish that, and just your general thoughts on Yuki for this weekend in general.
I wholeheartedly agree with you as far as he's been at Racing Bulls for a while now, but if he doesn't really show himself that he's able to go and beat Lawson more times than not, he's not going to get the seat at Red Bull. Just no way. They're always going to take the top performer, even if he's only been there for a few races. They're always going to pick him versus somebody that is consistently losing out from that top spot. So he's going to have to get his game on, and whatever his coaches were telling him before, he's going to have to knuckle down and just really just start ripping through this as quickly as possible. And that's really the only way that I see him getting out of Racing Bulls is he has to beat Lawson consistently and not by a place. It has to be a fairly significant margin.
So let's talk about Mercedes up and down weekend real quick. So not George qualifies really well, qualifies second, but he loses out between the Lando's brilliant move at the start and Ferrari's really, really strong showing this weekend. I'm sorry.
I was laughing. I said, "Yeah, no kidding." Lando's brilliant.
So
move,
he ends up dropping down to fifth during the sprint, and then qualifying for the race ends up being just disastrous with Russell going off and ends up starting at the back of the field. You've got Lewis also, he qualified, okay, in seventh for the sprint, finishes sixth on the day, and takes a couple of points for Mercedes. But then neither driver manages to make it out of Q1 because between George Russell going off and, during qualifying and having to start from the back of the grid, and Lewis didn't even make it out of Q1 for the race.
Yeah.
So it was really not, the sprint was okay. And we saw some promise, but in the end, because Lewis didn't even finish the race on Sunday and George was only able to make it up to, well, actually, sixth place is actually pretty respectable considering he started at the back of the grid. So I take that back. But it was really just a very up and down weekend for Mercedes. And your thoughts on?
Oh yeah, it was very disappointing because for Lewis is he crashed in the exact place that Russell did.
Exactly.
Something that that Merc just did not like that corner. So yeah, a horrible weekend for Lewis, and usually he does really well at this track. So it was unfortunate not to see him actually compete. But just like you said, Russell had a fairly good weekend, especially since he started from the back of the grid and he was able to make many places up until six.
So one of the other things too, though, is that you mentioned during last week during our preview part of the show when we talked about who you thought would surprise for this weekend. You must have a crystal ball or something, my friend. Between you almost got the podium exactly right. And you also said that Haas would surprise this weekend, and Haas did not, as we already mentioned earlier during the show, that they did not disappoint this weekend, that they had an absolutely outstanding, qualifying for the sprint, had an outstanding sprint itself, in the fact that, both drivers brought home points. And then during, the qualifying for the race itself, they both did very well. And in the race, they looked really, really strong all weekend long. So what's your secret, sir?
Yeah. I wish I had one, man. It's just pure luck of the draw, I guess.
All right, so let's talk about other news then real quick before we get into our Mexico preview. So really probably the biggest thing to come out this week was the news that at a meeting for the FIA that they have decided starting next year, they will no longer be awarding a bonus point for the fastest lap, providing the drivers finishes in the top 10. So what your thoughts on them dropping that particular extra point for fastest lap?
I don't like it. I like that fastest lap. I like that, one of my right now, I guess one of my better memories of Danny Rick is that last race. He went out and he stole that last point from Norris to really give Max an additional point. So I love that extra point. I love that you can get fastest lap, and I just like the competitiveness in that. It really pushes drivers to go that much faster. And I don't know. I'm a big fan of it. I hate to see it go. What about you?
I too am sad to see it go. I'm like you. I think that it's that extra incentive.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that I think that, but the thing is I think that they should have kept it, but I think that they should have made it so that whoever wound up with the fastest lap got a point, period, of where you finished. As long as you
Yeah, that's true.
finish the race, I think you should get that bonus point. I think this whole, the driver has to be in the top 10 in order to get that bonus point for fastest lap. Because if you're outside of the top 10 and you get the fastest lap, then it's just a matter of pride. But I think you should still be the driver should still be rewarded for hanging it out, even if, and I know some people complained about, Danny Ricks getting the fastest lap and taking it away from Lando, and the fact that he didn't get a point for it because he finished outside of the top 10, and he basically just stopped, took an extra pit stop, grabbed some super, some sticky tires, and went out there and laid down a blistering lap,
Yeah,
on a very low fuel load, just in order to get that point of pride. Well, I think that he should have at least gotten the point for it.
I
And
agree.
that's
Yeah, I
where I
do agree with
differ.
that,
In fact,
definitely.
I think that, yes, I think that they should get the point no matter, providing they finish. I do think that,
Yeah,
if they
right.
fastest lap like on lap 17 and then they end up crashing out and not finishing the race, I don't think that they should get a point at that point. But so providing they finish the race, if they had the fastest lap, they should get a point no matter what. But
Right.
that's just that's my one caveat that I had. That so the fact that we're losing it altogether, just kind of, I'm like you. It's like I'm kind of sad to see that part of it go.
Yeah. I'm curious as to the rationale behind that.
I think it was just a lot of it was like what we just talked about, though, is the fact that by getting rid of the point altogether, that does stop some of the lower teams that when they're running outside, because like you mentioned, and I didn't even think about it until you mentioned it, that Danny Rick pulling into the pits, grabbing a fresher set of rubber and going out and laying a blistering lap to take the fast, so because he finished outside of the top 10, he didn't get the bonus points. So he basically negated the bonus point, but you're like you said, he took it away from Lando.
Yep.
And so he lost that one extra bonus point in the drivers and constructors championship standings with, because with Racing Bulls being the quote unquote junior team to Red Bull, it was a matter of Danny Rick helping out the big boy team, the parent team, at the last, so I understand, the reason why they're taking away that bonus point is because it does prevent a team that may be running outside of the top 10 during the race doing just the same thing, where they pull in, throw on a set of brand new tires and go out, in the waning stages of the race and setting down a blistering lap and taking that bonus point away from, maybe somebody who is running in the top 10, so I understand why they're taking it away and what brought about that. But like I said, I think that the thinking behind that is not strong enough to take it away. But it is what it is, and we've lost that, at least ways for the foreseeable future.
Right, right.
All right, so in the last few minutes that we have today, let's take and do our preview for the Mexico Grand Prix this weekend. For the preview, we're going to do the same 4 questions that we always do for our previews. And so the first question I pose to you is, who do you think is going to go well this weekend?
I'm going to stay with Ferrari and Red Bull. I think they
Yeah.
both are, obviously, I think that McLaren will do well, but I really think that it's going to be Ferrari and Red Bull's race.
Yeah. I agree with you in the fact with both of those because again, because of such a short turnaround between Austin and Mexico,
Yeah.
the teams aren't going to have, it's not like there's going to be a big raft of upgrades. So because Ferrari and Red Bull look so strong, and McLaren too, but I really think that Ferrari are going to come out of the gate at Mexico in a really strong position. And this Mexico is a track that is going to really is a lot like COTA in the fact that it's going to really suit Ferrari. And if they are able to pull off the brilliant moves like they did during the race and during the sprint, I think that Ferrari is going to go very, very well this weekend.
Yeah. Nice.
So,
Nice.
who's going to be your disappointment this weekend? Who do you think's not going to go well?
You know, I hate to say it, but Mercedes. I mean,
You
Lewis
think
does
they're going
so
to be
well on
further
this
down in the
track.
pack?
I'm sorry.
You think they're going to be further down in the pack?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't see them doing very well on this track. By Mercedes standards, that's like anywhere from fifth to eighth.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think I definitely think that they'll be in the points, but I definitely think that they're going to be bringing up the rear of the points, or they might be outside of the points as well. They might, you know, I'm with you in the fact that I don't think Mercedes is going to go very well this weekend, and but my disappointment for this weekend, though, I'm going to say is, besides the usual suspects in Sauber
Yeah,
and
yeah, of
Alpine,
course.
I don't think that this track is going to suit the Aston Martin very well, and I think
Yeah.
that they're going to have some mighty struggles this weekend. At least was looking into my crystal ball, which, as
Yeah.
we've seen over the last couple races, my crystal ball has been pretty damn cloudy. So,
But that's a good one because I wasn't thinking Aston at all, and I bet you're right on Aston Martin.
yeah. So I think that they're gonna have another struggle this weekend
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
No, agreed.
So all right, so who's going to be your surprise this weekend?
Oh, my surprise. I'm gonna say Racing Bulls. I have a good feeling about it, especially with Liam there. As we discussed, I think that Yuki has his work cut out for him. I think that they're going to squeeze every ounce of that car this weekend.
I think that's a very good pick. That I think you're right. I think now with having scored points and everything, I think that Liam's confidence level is going to be extremely high. I think that he's going to be looking to build upon what he had last weekend. But I'm also going to go with Haas. I
Yeah.
think that you nailed it, last week, and I think that again with that short turnaround time, the teams that we saw do really, really well last week at COTA, and because of the similarities in the tracks between COTA and Mexico, I think Haas is going to have another really, really good weekend. And so that's going to be my surprise pick for the
Nice.
weekend.
All right, very cool.
All right. So who's your podium this weekend?
So I'm gonna go with Signs. I'm still staying with Max, and then I'll go with Lando, third place.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right, so I'm going to change it up just a little bit. That I do think that Ferrari's going to be on the, definitely going to be right there in the thick of things. But I'm going to go with Signs as well for the top step. I think he's going to, because something that Crofty said during the telecast over the weekend. He was talking about how Sainz is, he's racing for himself, at this point, because with his exit from Ferrari to Williams, but I think he's kind of driving, what's the word? What am I looking for? He's basically giving notice to Ferrari saying, hey, if Lewis doesn't work out, I'm still available and I am still willing to do everything I can to take and help the Scarlet cars win. So I'm going to go with Signs as well, but but I'm going to actually flip flop your other two. That I'm going to say it's going to be Lando is going to come in second and Max is
Yeah.
going to come in third.
All right, right on.
Okay. Very cool. All right, then. So I think we're about done for today, don't you?
I do. Yeah.
I do. All right. So the checkered flag is waved on another fantastic US Grand Prix at COTA. Join us next week where we'll have more technology goodness from our tech corner, more pundit stumping trivia from Corey, and a full breakdown of the action from Mexico City. So until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.